In this lesson, we'll cover how to engage with technically dense reading comprehension passages in the verbal reasoning section of the GMAT Focus Edition. So, first, understand that usually there's going to be 1 to 2 pretty dense passages in your 4 passages that you're likely to see within the verbal section. And these dense passages generally involve one longer paragraph about a technically specific topic that you're probably not familiar with. And these are both possible reading comprehension style content, and it's also possible for reading comprehension style problems in the data insights, multi source reasoning, and 2-part analysis questions as well. Now, strategically, you have to read carefully and deliberately to ensure comprehension of what is likely to be a relatively obscure topic. You will consider using the online whiteboard text box to facilitate a sentence by sentence passage map. I'll be typing here in our example in a moment, but you can also handwrite if that's just your personal preference. You'll want to use initials or shorthand to simplify the notation of unfamiliar jargon and acronyms and synthesize the information and note the location of the subject matter to better answer the questions that show up, 3 or 4 of them, as is likely for our reading comprehension passages in the verbal reasoning section. So we've got a sample reading comprehension passage on the left-hand side, and you can see it's one big paragraph. And so we're going to read a sentence and write a brief note summarizing its content if we decide we're just going to try to deal with a dense passage map. You'll then read the next sentence and write a brief note summarizing its content to build a narrative from the prior sentence, the note that you took. Then you can black box terms that seemingly require outside knowledge by noting with initials or shorthand. And ultimately, you can just treat unfamiliar concepts as like almost mathematic variables and be like, okay, I don't know what this is, but I'll get enough information to answer questions about it from the context. And oftentimes you'll find that the summary notes will naturally get shorter and more just kind of natural as you get further along in the passage because you end up knowing what's happening by forcing yourself to engage at the outset. And most of the time, you don't have to worry about producing an overall passage summary at the end of the notes because you've pretty much noted everything that is necessary. So let's take a look at a sample dense passage map using this passage. So given its rugged coastline and dearth of safe boat landings, ancient foraging on Anacapa Island must have been relatively challenging. So we just say, for sentence 1, AI, which is how we're going to shorthand Anacapa Island every time, is going to have been hard to forage a long time ago due to rugged coast and no safe boat landings. Then, today, fresh water is found only in an isolated spring with no perennial running water on any of the island segments. So, sentence 2, today, AI, only fresh water in one spring. Simple enough. As a result, vegetation is currently dominated by coastal bluff scrub and coastal sage scrub, with trees and shrubs limited primarily to 2 protected gullies on the northern slope of West Anacapa and at Shepherd's Landing on Middle Anacapa. Oh, there's a lot going on here. So we're just going to shorthand CBS and CSS as coastal bluff scrub and coastal sage scrub. And they dominate AI vegetation with trees and shrubs limited to 2 places in West and Middle AI. I now know what that means, and I'm going to focus on my notes if we get asked questions about the shrubs and the scrubs. Then, California sea lions and harbor seals are commonly seen in the waters and rocks around the island, but the absence of extensive beaches, except at Frenchie's Cove on West Anacapa, limits the area for pinnipeds to haul out. So, sentence 4, sea lions and seals in water around AI, but no beaches to rest on, with that exception if it comes up. So, then the rocky coasts of Anacapa support rich, rocky intertidal and kelp forest ecosystems, and the island is more exposed to the warm southerly waters of the California countercurrent than some of the other northern channel islands. So, sentence 5, AI has rich intertidal and kelp forest ecosystems. Simple enough. Then, the steep slopes of the island make it difficult for people to bring marine resources to sites on the top of the island, although access may have been easier in the past. So, sentence 6, steep slopes make hard to reach top of island, may have been easier before. Again, just making this accessible. Then, lastly, Anacapa Island hosts enormous colonies of nesting birds, especially western gulls and brown pelicans, the latter of which use Anacapa and Santa Barbara Islands as a primary nesting area along the west coast of the United States. So many nesting bird colonies, especially WG and BP, meaning western gulls and brown pelicans, which use AI, so Anacapa Island and SBA Santa Barbara Islands, as primarily U.S. coast, primary west U.S. coast nesting area. Simple enough. So then we've taken this map and now we get an actual detailed task. So we've got, according to the passage, each of the following can be presently found on Anacapa Island except. So we've got our passage map of notes, and we recall having seen sea lions and harbor seals before, and they're right in the middle. And it says they're commonly seen in the waters around the island, and they are limited, but that doesn't mean that they aren't there. And in fact, we can infer that accepted Frenchie's Cove means that they are there, just at that one place as opposed to everywhere. So we can eliminate choice A and B for the information directly in the passage. Then we have protected harbors, and we don't recall seeing anything about protected harbors. We just use the little squiggle for now for this. Then fresh water, it's definitely there. There's just not a lot of it again, so we get rid of choice D. And nesting birds, we know there was a lot of nesting birds. And if we go to the very top, we see, given its rugged coastline and dearth of safe boat landings, well, that means there aren't any protected harbors. And so that becomes our correct answer. And with these except not least tasks, make sure that you carefully note when you're being asked to find the exception. Don't pick the first thing that accomplishes the task accidentally, because here we're being asked for the thing that doesn't exist on Anacapa Island presently. And we have to pick the one exception as opposed to the four things that are presently on the island. Then we've got a sample purpose task. We've got the reference to Frenchie's Cove is most likely intended to. So we see Frenchie's Cove there in the middle. And we'd read above, and we've got at least a sentence above and a sentence below. We'd get, as a result, vegetation is currently dominated by coastal bluff scrub and coastal sage scrub, with trees and shrubs limited primarily to two protected gullies on the northern slope of West Anacapa and at Shepherd's Landing on Middle Anacapa. California sea lions and harbors are common, and harbor seals are commonly seen in the waters and rocks around the island, but the absence of extensive beaches, except at Frenchie's Cove on West Anacapa, limits the area for pinnipeds to haul out. The rocky coasts of Anacapa support rich rocky intertidal, and I know I'm no longer talking about Frenchie's Cove here. So we've got our prediction of give a location where sea lions and harbor seals can quote unquote haul out. So we want to show that this is the one place that doesn't follow everything else in the surrounding context. So provide an exception to a general state of affairs. This is nice and bland and seems okay. You might say I could give that a check, but at worst it's getting the squiggle. Explain why certain animals are present in a location. Well, it doesn't explain why they're at Frenchie's Cove. It just provides the exception for the rule. So we can eliminate this for basically being a what answer to a why question. It tells us what Frenchie's Cove is, it's where they exist, but it's not actually explaining why they're there. Then articulate an alternative hypothesis for a phenomenon. There's no alternative hypothesis, so we can eliminate that pretty directly. Differentiate between two instances of the same occurrence. No, Frenchie's Cove is different. It's not the same, so we can eliminate choice D for that. And question the validity of available anecdotal evidence. Nothing's being questioned here, so we can eliminate choice E and happily select choice A ultimately as our correct answer. And you may have honestly been able to find that as a check mark without the squiggle usage, although we're just illustrating how our process of elimination can work. So let's take a look at one more example, an inference task this time. We've got, with which of the following statements regarding the vegetation of Anacapa Island would the author most likely agree? So we know we can restate this as, what must the author agree about the vegetation of Anacapa Island? We see vegetation here in the center of the third sentence, and we might read a little bit above and a little bit below. So we've got, today fresh water is found only in an isolated spring with no perennial running water on any of the island segments. As a result, vegetation is currently dominated by coastal bluff scrub and coastal sage scrub, with trees and shrubs limited primarily to two protected gullies on the northern slope of West Anacapa and at Shepherd's Landing on Middle Anacapa. Because we had our detailed passage map, we would know not to continue at this point. Even though we say generally read a sentence above and a sentence below, The next sentence is going into the sea lions. That has nothing to do with vegetation. So now we just got to find an answer choice that matches this information directly, but isn't exactly stated. Now, choice A, coastal scrubs are best adapted to an island environment. And we've got a prediction there of dominated by CBS and CSS, of course. So coastal scrubs are best adapted to an island environment. Well, no, that best adapted goes too far, so we can eliminate choice A as being extreme. Many trees and shrubs require groundwater sources to flourish. Well, that makes sense because it's dominated by the coastal bluff scrub and the coastal sage scrub, and we know that they are limited to the protected gullies where there is actually water. So trees and shrubs requiring groundwater sources to flourish is a logical inference that must be true based on the statements of the passage directly. Then choice C, a surplus of freshwater vegetation can lead to a water shortage. Well, a surplus, no, that's a reversal. It's actually that there's a shortage that leads to the water shortage. Then choice D, protected gullies are necessary to support most island plant life. We can't go so far as to say most island plant life. Certainly trees and shrubs, but maybe not those scrubs, and maybe the scrubs are the things that exist most. And then choice E, cooler northerly waters can suppress biological diversity. We do talk about the waters elsewhere in the passage, but not here. And we know we've got to stick to what the subject is for these dense passages and for inference tasks for that matter. So we'd confidently select choice B as being basically the other half of the coin, that because the island is dominated by CBS and CSS, that means that the freshwater was necessary for the other things such as trees and shrubs. So, step one of our reading comprehension dense passage process. First, determine a need for a sentence by sentence passage map. It's not something you want to do all the time, but if you find yourself a couple of sentences into a passage that's dense, one paragraph, and you're like, I'm getting lost, force yourself to do this to force the engagement, because otherwise you'll quickly end up missing 3 or 4 questions in a row. You'll then take a shorthand summary note for each sentence as you go. Remember to use acronyms and shorthand to help with the things that are more obscure in terms of technical terms. And then step 2, read the question to determine the subject in your task. And of course, set up the scratch pad as normal with the question task in a standard what style phrasing. Then read at least one sentence above and below for context, but you can use your passage map to potentially expedite this process. Step 4, predict what the answer should do to address the question task based on whatever detail you need with that prediction. And of course, step 5, you want to focus on actions and descriptions for objective reasons to eliminate as you execute our process of elimination. And when you're down to 2, as always, default to selecting the option with fewer direct terms from the passage and a less absolute claim, because we know we always want to go bland. So let's head on over to the whiteboard to see how you'll execute your own dense passage map, sentence by sentence, to improve your performance on what are often the hardest passages for most GMAT focused test takers. So as always, we'll set up our scratch work first. We got A, B, C, D, E. We read the question, which of the following best describes the structure of the passage? So the subject is the passage as a whole, and we're just going to write out what is the structure as our question. So because we're being asked for an overall passage subject, and we've got a relatively dense passage, and you can see there's like these delightful little italicized scientific names already jumping out at us, we might decide it's best to just go ahead, bite the bullet, and do a sentence by sentence passage map. So sentence 1, you'll read the sentence and then you'll try to summarize it for yourself. Scuba-based observations and experiments help promote the idea that positive interactions among species play key roles in the maintenance of biodiversity by facilitating the persistence of habitats created by foundation species, which are now often called physical ecosystem engineers. So we know that scuba experiments helped promote the idea of PEEs, for physical ecosystem engineers. Simple enough. So then sentence 2, this critical role was demonstrated for Panamanian coral reefs in the early 1970s by elegant experiments following Peter Glynn's observation that, and we're not going to try to pronounce this, T crabs and A snapping shrimp living within branching pea coral colonies prevented the crown of thorns starfish, a pea, from feeding on the corals. So we know that the 1970s experiments by PG showed that PEEs preserved the pea coral colonies. And we're not even going to write out the T crabs and the snapping shrimp. We're just good that this is all there, and we've got to show that the pea coral colonies were saved by these things if something comes back up around it. Now, we then move on. Pea colonies where protective symbionts were experimentally removed suffered higher rates of destruction by AP, and coral diversity was higher where the crown of thorns starfish was prevented from foraging. Okay, so we know that if AP starfish was stopped, then pea coral, higher diversity. And we'll just say div for short. Then, another example of positive interactions affecting foundation species and ultimately species diversity comes from the Caribbean four reef slope. Okay, so we've got S4 is there's just going to be another example from the Carib FS for four reef slope. It was hypothesized that sponges enhance the persistence of, we'll just call them F corals, on the steep four reef slope by binding the corals to the reef frame. So S5 is that we know that in the Carib FS, hypothesized that sponges helped F coral. And we just keep coral because that's a consistent kind of variable for throughout this passage. Then we continue. Sentence 6. Corals fell off the reef slope on manipulated reefs where divers removed the sponges from the coral interstices, resulting in elevated coral mortality. So we know that scuba divers removing sponges equal F coral death. We're going to simplify it for our purposes, but we've got to know what's happening. And it's a little bit facetious, but that's really what's occurring. And you want to make sure that you're understanding things as opposed to just like narrating and literally copy and pasting because it won't make sense to you. You need to engage with the content, even though it's relatively abstract, I imagine. Then later work in similar habitats showed that the underside of F corals supports an exceptionally high diversity of epifaunal invertebrates. Okay, so we know sentence 7 that similar work showed F coral underside very div for diverse. Thus, the positive effect of sponges on foliaceous corals enhances community-wide biodiversity. So sentence 8 is that sponges saving the F coral equals up biodiversity. So we've got this whole thing as our summary and a passage map. And obviously, it takes a little bit more time as I work through it here with you, but it's really about a 4-minute process to do this if you do it well without explaining it as you go. So now we just got to cross check our answer choices against the passage map that we've gone and created sentence by sentence. So, choice A claim is made. Scuba experiments help promote the idea of PEEs. Seems kind of like a claim. And examples are provided. Well, yeah, we've got the example from PG in the 1970s and then from the Caribbean four reef slope. So both of these things are true. And if you feel confident in your prediction, go ahead and select that. Now, a theory is given and evidence is provided for and against it. There's nothing against it, so we can call that a reversal, and that's out pretty quickly. A new scientific methodology is introduced. Well, we don't know that scuba is new. It just says that helped promote this idea, so that would be qualified as extreme and able to be eliminated. Then choice D, a hypothesis is offered and then refuted. It's definitely not refuted, so that's a reversal. One experiment is described and another offers an updated methodology. We don't know that it's updated. And it also isn't matching our prediction from the passage map at all, whereas A really did. So we can happily select A here. And the nice thing about the sentence by sentence passage map is we can now take it to our next question here just down the whiteboard. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this just underneath for our reference. And so, which of the following would be most analogous to the elegant experiments mentioned in the passage? So, we've got limited room here, but we're going to still write out A, B, C, D, E for process of elimination. And we just want to know what matches the EE. So, the elegant experiments we know is right here. And so, we need to find something that matches these experiments where they took something away and then saw it basically come back, and the impacts of when it was taken away or when it was put back. So looking at our answer choices now, a longitudinal study of the global population trends of an entire order of sea creatures. Well, we're talking about one specific location where we took away a sponge and we took away the snapping shrimp and the crab. So it's not the entire order. That does not match at all. Choice B, a closely controlled experiment involving starfish observed outside of their natural habitat. Well, no, we're entirely in the natural habitat. So that's a technical reversal that they're hoping you just recognize the word starfish and went, yeah, that's it. Now, choice C, an experiment conducted in a laboratory. Well, the entire point is that it's not in the laboratory. So that too would be a contextual reversal. Using scuba equipment to build artificial coral structures. Again, we're not artificial. And they use the phrase or the word scuba, hoping you'll pick scuba just because you remember scuba. But that's the absolute opposite of what happened with the elegant experiments of going into the Panamanian coral reefs and actually removing things physically from a wild environment. Then choice E, engaging a team of divers to physically relocate a species of seahorse from a coral reef habitat and observing the impact of the action. Now, yes, it does say coral reef habitat, but in this case, it really does match exactly what was happening. So you can confidently select this and hopefully relatively expediently by way of using your detailed sentence by sentence passage map. So for some of the higher difficulty, more obscure scientific and technical passages involving just a single dense paragraph, consider a sentence by sentence passage map and work on this specific tactic to improve maybe not speed at the outset, but certainly accuracy and speed through the subsequent questions to improve at this higher end difficulty aspect of the reading comprehension in the verbal reasoning section of the GMAT Focus.